Martin Fournier welcomes you to Size Does Matter. Mhm. Hey everyone, welcome to my brand new series. Uh, I don't know how it's called yet. I am gonna decide that after that video. So, welcome to the new series. The series is gonna be, I don't know how long, I don't know how many episodes, and I don't know exactly how I am gonna work it out. I just got the brilliant idea a couple of hours ago about that series. It's gonna talk mainly about bet sizing. It's gonna focus a lot on that. I think there's gonna be some like Henry player hands and stuff like that with some live plays, maybe some reviewed session uh, throughout it. And how I think I'm gonna approach it is that I'm gonna like move up in stakes and explain bet sizing concepts, basically. Sorry, I'm gonna find my words. Yeah, bet sizing concepts as you move up in stakes. What to do, what not to do, how to add certain bet sizings to your arsenal, the overbet, the underbet, stuff like that. Because I really think that is one of the very big and common leaks among a lot of regulars, a lot of people who are often struggling to move up, stuck at like small stakes, mid stakes, people who basically always bet like 2/3, 3/4 of the pot. I see a lot of the regulars, even the good ones, always go with that kind of line, and that's often a sign, I think, of people more playing like by a system and not thinking by themselves a lot. And I think switching your bet sizing and adapting your bet sizings to the situations and stuff like that is really a big sign of often a good thinking player. Uh, so that's pretty much it for the series as far as it goes. This one is the first episode, and I decided to make that episode at 50 cents a dollar. It's gonna be just one episode of live play, and in this one, I'm gonna focus mainly on bet sizing against weaker players, basically, because I expect those players to be a bit weaker than your normal player. And I'm facing an overbet here. Yeah, that's a problem. A lot of weaker players not being able to make overbets like I see, like you see. So I look dumb right off the bat, but that's fine. I'm gonna fold that. I think it's pretty without any reads. I think it is the correct standard way to play the end. But yeah, this video in particular, like I said, it's gonna be four tables of 50 cent a dollar. I don't know exactly how it will work out. Basically, I'm gonna try to explain some concepts about bet sizing that some people might not even have ever thought about or are just not applying in their games. Uh, I don't know if like I will get the spots, the correct spots to talk about those kind of concepts. I hope so. Otherwise, well, worst thing happens. I mean, I get a good live footage, and that's pretty much it. So yeah, I guess that's pretty much it. I will go with that and see what happens from here. I decided to not open first thing of the bat of my mind. I decided to not open any deep tables here because that's the first concept that I wanted to talk about. Basically, is the fact that uh, the deeper you are, the less important bet sizing becomes. Basically, I mean it's still important, but uh, if I put it to the extreme, basically, if you're playing 1,000 big blinds deep, opening to like 6x the blinds or 7x is no longer such a mistake and might not even be a mistake under certain circumstances as when you are playing a short stack or in a tournament or something like that with 20, 25 big blinds opening like with 30 big blinds maybe opening to like 5x the blinds is pretty much always going to be a pretty big mistake. And that applies to like the flop and the turn plays as well. You want to be able, when you are shorter, to better size your bets so you leave enough room behind if you want a three barrel, if you want like to shove on the turn and stuff like that, because you are gonna play with your stack. A lot of the bet sizing concepts are gonna be in direct link to your stack size most of the time, and that's something that I want you all to during this series understand and realize and try to apply to your game basically. Among other things, being able to bet correctly depending on what you want to do uh, according to your stack. The other concept right off my head is being able to bet certain amounts for the purpose of either like basically manipulating your opponent into doing some stuff, either by inducing some bluffs with weak bets or inducing some tin call down with like bigger bets with weaker ends or stuff like that. Stuff that most of the time you want to know on what level your opponent is thinking, basically, for you to be able to make the correct play, the correct bet sizing in certain situations. And those are all things that I'm certainly going to talk about during this series, and hopefully during that video if I ever catch an interesting hand, which hasn't happened so far. Uh, so yeah, stuff like that basically, because like I said, I'm just gonna repeat myself until I get a hand basically, but uh, it's a very big league of a lot of players that I see always going like 2/3, 3/4 of the pot. And yeah, I've said all of that already. I had like, I think I had another idea in mind, but it will probably come back later. So let's just hope now that I get some hands. Yeah, what I'm going to focus on this particular video is bet sizing against kind of weaker opponents. I think I said that, but like in general, how it's gonna be different from bet sizing against stronger opponents is that you want your bet sizing against uh, players playing on like the zero or the first or even the second level. Basically players you have a very easy to get read on, very very easy read to get on, whatever. Uh, nah, okay, yeah, you are going to have your bet sizing in direct link to your hand reading, I think, at those levels. Basically, what I'm trying to say is that you don't really care about representing anything against certain players, against certain non really thinking players, because they don't even know, they don't even care about what you're representing. What you want to do is being able to just hand read their hand the best you can, and from there work for like the best bets you can, the best sizings you can, basically the best actions you can, which is also true for basically any anything you do at these levels, any kind of play you do at these levels. Uh, so I think that's pretty much it. Here, this is a pretty good example right off the bat of a spot where you're sizing. I mean, as a general concept, I'm gonna start with that. Uh, you normally want your bluff to be as cheap as possible and your value to be as big as possible. In an ideal world, uh, you would bet the pot basically every single time when you have a hand, and you would bet like half the pot or less, just as much as you need for the opponent to fold when you don't have a hand, when you're bluffing basically. And that's something that I think a lot of players are forgetting very often, because when they turn on the autopilot mode or stuff like that, what that means is that against weak players, you pretty much can't do that very often. Against very weak players, you can go for value, like pot size bet for values, and just like very small bets when you are going for a bluff. This doesn't apply at higher limits because if you do that, you become very easily readable. But like I said, against players that don't really try to read you, this is pretty important. So that's pretty much it for like the overall situation. I don't think any hands that I've played so far is very relevant. Uh, I did want to make a quick note on that hand. I'm gonna play my other ones just before that. This is a very close spot. I decided to see bet the flop just because I have a couple of backdoors. I have equity, and I did not want to either check call, check raise. I think betting is the best option, which is gonna show me the best profit. Here I'm gonna check call that one. Now on that turn with ace 10, I think a check is in order. I don't really like betting because I could get shoved maybe by some other draws. I'm just checking, hoping he checks back basically. And now I am gonna bet, I think, a pretty small amount. This is a spot where the sizing is important. I'm gonna come back on it later, but I'm gonna bet pretty small amount, hope to get called by a worse club because anyways I think I am gonna have to call a bit. I don't. The only sad thing is I don't really have reads on the players right now, and getting as much information as possible right off the bat is gonna be pretty important. Uh, but yeah, first things first. This very handy ace queen that I bet the flop. Yeah, this one. This is a spot where you really don't need to bet big. Pretty much no matter who your opponents are, I think. Uh, Three-way white like that on the board like that, most of the time when the original raiser checks, is gonna be just to give up. He's basically check giving up, and he's very often not even looking at your bet sizing. And this is but if you're playing against like not very aware opponents, basically, where you can bet anywhere from like $3 to $7, and it's very often gonna make the exact same job because most of the time this guy is just giving up. The only thing that you have to be afraid of is the other guy in the blinds. If is he gonna play back at you if you bet too small, or is he gonna call you later or stuff. I decided to go for a more standard bet there. I think betting big as a bluff on that kind of board is just a mistake, just a total mistake. I think this is a kind of situation basically, unless you're playing against someone that really knows your game, where you can go big when you have a hand and small when you don't have a hand. And this is going to be really correct because people often already made their mind on whether they are going to be playing back at you or not, whether they're going to call one street or not, whether they're going to check raise or not, and stuff like that. And when you're looking at these type of spots and you have to recognize them, bet sizing becomes, like I said, something that like you want to bet just as small as possible with your bluffs without being recognized basically as big as possible with your value. So this was a pretty good example, pretty simple example, pretty good example of what your thinking process should be when you are looking at doing certain types of bet sizings. Here I did not see that this guy was still in hand. I would probably have folded the flop. I just called because that guy just like led for bet for the pot with nothing at all and gave up right after it a couple of hands ago. I'm just gonna try to check it down. Oh, my 5 is good, which is not really often. The other hands that I missed, decided to go for 4 tables instead of my new usual 3. Be good one time, oh no! Because I thought this could give me more interesting spots to talk about bet sizing because you do really need some certain specific situations very often to expand about bet sizing, especially post flop. I decided to check all that flop. This is a flop where you certainly don't want to get raised, and I think this is a flop where like check calling is never gonna put me into any trouble, and I think if I check call, he's gonna like value bet himself with king queen or ace queen very often. So I'm not really missing any value from any high top pairs. I certainly don't want to get raised on the flop because I'm never in that good of a shape, I think. And uh, I think I'm gonna get a couple of streets of value from weaker hands by check calling and underrepresenting my hand basically. This one is a pretty interesting spot. My king queen I just got. I decided to go big on the turn. I'm gonna explain why later. Now I'm gonna see that I am running into the absolute nuts, which sucks. Nothing I could do there. Quick explanation on my sizing there, which is I think really important. I squeeze pre-flop to a standard amount, not much to say there. He called. I decide to bet standard continuation bet on the flop. I could have gone a little smaller, just to keep some weaker hands in the mix. I expect that guy to be not that good. I mean, I don't know him, but I do know that he's playing 50 cent a dollar, and that he's playing only one table that I'm at. So I don't know if he's a regular or anything, but I'm gonna assume right off the bat that he's not really good. I'm gonna call what he says. That is a good sizing to have. Uh, no diamond, yay. Uh, I could have gone a little smaller, and looking back on it, kind of regret it because this is kind of board where your opponent is pretty much always gonna call one street with like any medium type of pocket pair that he's gonna have quite a lot for like calling again on the button there. And no matter how much you bet, basically, your standard opponent here is gonna call one bet pretty much always often. All that doesn't make sense. Pretty much always. Uh, so you want to bet big for value and small for bluffs against someone that is not gonna make much of a case about your bet sizing, basically. And I'm out of here. Would have probably called against that guy. I'm not really sure. I wasn't decided yet, but when the other guy gets in, it's obviously fold. Uh, but this is a lot of hands. Why is nothing happened at the beginning and now everything is happening? Why? God. So yeah, betting smaller on that flop against an unknown who doesn't know your game, I think is better as a bluff. Because like I said, you can keep some weaker hands in the mix too, because you're certainly looking for a couple of barrels here, trying to make him fold as many hands as possible. And I think what I was about to say basically is that this is a kind of spot where if you're for value, you often want to go ahead and try to get the money in as quick as possible in like two streets, just because your standard opponent's thinking process there is gonna be, well, I'm calling one or two barrels and I'm folding to the third, and that's true very often, more often than you might think. Even if it's pretty basic, it is true for a lot of players. So, like I said, you want to manipulate your sizing, and that's why I've gone big on that turn, because I think if I go small again on the turn, if I go like 22, 24 on the turn, when I hit what I think was basically the nuts, a hand that I have to treat like the nuts on the turn, basically, I think he's gonna fold pretty much always on the river. So I'm gonna get like maximum if he has something like pocket 8 that I expect him to have quite a lot in that kind of spot. Uh, he's gonna fold a lot on the river, so I'm gonna get like 20, 22, 24 maximum value. As to when I bet like $50 there, I think he's gonna be more curious more often, because he does like he has to take a decision right away, and he's just gonna decide, okay, I'm getting it in or I'm not getting it in with like my middle pocket. And if he decides to get in, like the reward of him getting it in is much bigger, because he has to, if I bet 24, he has to like get in like one third of the time than when I go for two barrels there for my bet to be more profitable. So I do think it was more profitable. So that's why I decided to go big there. And I still think it is the right play, but we basically will never know. This hand, I decided to delay a C bet, try to make him fold nothing at all on turn, but with the ace getting there, he's probably not even folding an ace. I don't know the guy, but I'm looking to make him fold like any Broadway two pairs, but he might even be curious because just has to check the flop. So, and he decided to call the turn with eggs, which totally pound me. So I'm gonna take a mental note that this guy is the type of guy to call it bet with 8 on that type of board when I check back the flop. So when I check back the flop for that guy, it's gonna be weakness, like huge weakness pretty much every single time. So this is a good thing to keep in mind. Sees weakness when check flop. I'm going for like from a subject to another, but this is going pretty fast. I'm gonna try to be not balanced, but to make sense a bit more. And there was one other hand I wanted to talk about. Yeah, this is the one. I explained during the hand already my flop and turn thought process. I went a bit smaller on the flop just because my goal here is basically to have him fold all of his nothing at alls, basically. So this is basically me trying to do a cheap bluff. I just think I was, if I compare it to my other hand, I was just betting a bit too big on the flop. On the other hand, I don't know why I chose this weird sizing. I don't really do that often. So yeah, bet flop. Turn I decided to check. I think it's pretty standard. Here, table one. I think this is a call. Way too many busted draws. I don't have any read on the guy, and this might give me a read. So this is pretty easy call, and he ends up turning up a queen, which he's gonna have quite some time too. But it's a price that I'm ready to pay. And interesting spot is the river. Some people might advocate a check call there. But I think when you check, you do have to call just because it's gonna turn over some random bluff. Sometimes pairs like a pair of 8 with no clubs that he decides to turn into a bluff or stuff like that. So you do have to call, but you're not good that often because he's gonna have a big diamond. I think some good percentage of time, but you are gonna get euro called a lot, especially if your opponent thinks that you're not value betting thin. And since this guy is on a couple of tables, I think he's capable of making such reads in this such play. So I decided to bet, and this is kind of spot I think where you have a couple of options as far as sizing goes. It's not like okay, I'm value betting, so I'm gonna bet 2/3. And like a lot of spots where you are talking about sizing, for you to make the right decision, it's really important to get a good grasp on how your opponent is probably thinking. Here, I thought that my opponent, from my very limited experience against him, but that's all that I had. I thought that my opponent is likely to look me up lighter if I bet smaller, because he might think that I'm attempting the cheap bluff basically, and he probably thinks that I don't have much of a club in it, but this is kind of spot against like more standard player where I think the lesser you bet, the more hero, like quote unquote hero calls you're gonna get from like any weak clubs or stuff like that. If I go for like the pot, I would go for the pot against certain opponents here for sure. Opponents that I would think would believe that I am very weak when I go for the pot, and if I want to look like I'm super polarized, basically, so I want them to hero call me, this would be a great spot to go for the pot. I didn't think that was the case in that end. I might be wrong. I will never know. But I ended up being called by a lone pair of jacks here, so I do like my play. I don't know if would have called bigger, but you just have to keep in mind that this is a spot where your sizing is 100% dependent on how your opponent is thinking. That's my bottom line. There's no good sizing here in a vacuum. You can't, and I see so many people when they're trying to review their hands or they're asking friends questions or stuff like that. They're like, oh, I played that hand, example, that hand. How much are you betting on the river? And this is a spot where seriously there's no good answer if you don't have a very good read on your opponent. You have to get information on your opponent, and you're gonna discover as far as that series goes that I'm gonna put a lot of emphasis on that, because with bet sizing, with trickier bet sizing, you're often trying to brain fuck your opponent, basically, trying to trick their minds. Uh, not when they're dumb, but when they're thinking players. You're making certain types of sizings, basically, to play into their heads and to manipulate them into doing some stuff. If you don't have, like, if you don't know how your opponent is thinking, this is gonna be totally impossible. to manipulate them. So there's a lot of emphasis that's gonna be put on getting good reads on players, so and exploiting them. So that's pretty much it. That's pretty sad though that I don't have like that many reads on the players I'm playing against right now. Uh, I would have had to play like 4 hours to get enough reads, or not even that much, but a couple, like maybe like an hour for starting my video. I unfortunately did not do that because my computer was having problems and I was pretty busy tilting against my fucking computer. So, but I just hope that you basically get the point that I'm trying to tell you, and I think that point illustrates very well a problem that people have with bet sizing. Basically, that they don't use their reads to their advantage, or they just don't get enough reads on their opponents. So that's it for that. I think I've talked about every end I wanted to talk about that has been played so far. Yes. Like I said, I know this is like really come like I'm going from a subject to another and stuff like that. Uh, uh, that tilts me so much because I do have to fold, but I'm just looking so gay right now by folding. It's just for the looks. Like I don't mind losing the money. It's just that what are they gonna think about me, man? Where's my virility? I'm dead. Uh, this is pretty much it. I know I double barreled a couple of boards, uh, but that's pretty much it. And I think those were pretty standard spots. This is weird. He is snap calling the first two streets. I think he's gonna hero call me quite some time because I expect him to know me because he just 4-bet bluff me, and I don't expect like players to 4-bet bluff that often, that type of situation. He was calling really, really fast, so I decided that he might have like a middle pocket pair, or he might very well have a flush draw there as well. But I did have quite a bad feeling about that just because of the fact that he just 4-bet bluffed me, and that tells me normally that he is a good enough player to know that I'm gonna be barreling the ace, pretty much always. And he might have been trying to like reverse timing tell me. I think that's something that players. Yeah, and he says me you should have shoved. I would have folded. I'm not even sure if he would have folded. But he probably knows me, and I think he was trying to do something like that to me, and I kind of had that feeling. But I still pull the trigger just to see what happens. I think at my regular stakes in that kind of situation, I would have just give up. Uh, Here, this is another spot, like I said, where bet sizing is often not really important when you're against an unknown because you want to bet as big as possible with your value because he's either giving up or no, and small as possible with your bluffs here. But I didn't think that would be the case against that guy because I did play like 20-25 minutes before starting the video, and he looked like he would try to play back at me quite a lot. So I think when I bet really small here, I look very weak, and I expect him to be check raising me here quite a lot because probably knows who I am if he's a regular, and he might try to get tricky on me. So I decided to go smaller here just because of the flow of the game and the fact that I think that he could play back at me. He could like decide to check raise an overpair with a big spades there. Sometimes, especially if I bet small and he thinks he's gonna miss value by like only check calling, or he could make a move at me with like nothing at all when I bet just half the pot. Just because I look so weak, and I basically do that with 100% of my range that has missed, and he probably has a good idea of that. So that's it for this one. I know there are a couple of other ideas I want to talk about bet sizing, but I think I've made my point pretty well. If it comes back to me right now, I'm gonna talk about it. But either way, I'm certainly gonna talk more about this kind of stuff in further videos in that series. And the videos in that series are gonna be like, it's not gonna be all in a row, like 20 videos of that series all in a row. Uh, I don't think so. So that's all I wanted to say. Here I'm just gonna fold the flush draw there. The fact that he could have king 10 as well, and I could very well be drawing dead. I think that's pretty easy fold. I'm pretty sad that the other guy folded the turn on table 2, just because I wanted to show you something on that type of spot against a lot of players. This is kind of board. I was going for a 3-barrel basically, because when he calls the flop, he has a pair between 9 and 4 so often, it's pretty much ridiculous. He's gonna have some ace highs in there, but he doesn't have that many like super strong hands, either an overpair or a set or a 4 there. I'm not gonna delay my c-bet against that guy because I just remember, yeah, he's the guy who sees weakness when the flop is checked. Uh, but yeah, my point here is I was going to 3-barrel when I bet that flop when he calls, especially when my opponent calls pretty fast there. And this is a spot that if he decides to call the turn, if he's like decides to be curious and calls the turn, if I think that my opponent still has a lot of like weakish hands when he calls the turn on that board, no matter what the river card is, basically, if the river card is like the deuce of spades, this is a spot where an overbet on the river against most players are gonna work close to 100% of the time if they have any sort of weakish hand, because this is a spot where you could very easily, I'm just gonna give up that one. You could very easily be overbidding for value pretty easily with like aces or king or stuff like that. There are a lot of hands that you can represent that could be value betting for. It could get could be betting for value with a big bet there. Just gonna try to isolate that random guy. I'm gonna guess aces a lot actually. This is weird. And he shoves just like I expected. I'm actually might be regretting my play right now, but I'm gonna call and see what happens. I could like isolate, but I don't really like the play because sometimes this guy might be strong, uh, and I'm not that in that good of a shape against that one. And even if I'm out of position, the pot is gonna be protected. Post flop, ooh, I almost. Oh no, I had time bank. I'm getting dumb. So I don't really mind playing out of position. I'm never ever gonna get bluffed out of that if the other guy has any sort of brain. So I'm just gonna try to check that down. And hopefully my king is gonna be good. I could have bet like $5 on the river for him to get curious with any weaker king or stuff like that, and I did win that. He did have eights. I don't think he's calling any sort of bet in a protected pot with eights, anyways. But yeah, I was talking about the possibility of overbetting that kind of spot, and this is a spot where, once again, you are when you overbet. Let's say the river is like a deuce of hearts. This is a spot where an overbet is going to be good for value against some players. It's going to be bad for value against some players. True goes with the bluff, depending on the purpose you want your overbet to have. And people are gonna struggle a lot, I think, with choosing their spots to either go for value or for bluff. That's something that great players have a good feel on, basically. Just either the flow, the dynamic of the game, the flow of how it's going and stuff. When you think that you're gonna get hero called on a big bluff and stuff like that, this is stuff that, like I said, great players know how to deal with and know how to put more pressure on their opponents by making that kind of play on that kind of board. And this is something you really want to add to your arsenal. And if you don't know when you're gonna be like hero called or people are gonna make big folds on you when you overbet and stuff, uh, keep that general rule of thumb in mind is that people are gonna fold to an overbet until they believe that you might actually be bluffing, and that could take a very long time. But at the beginning, and either like normal people, if you're in a battle that nobody has any reads, and or he has reads on you, but you've never over bet really anyone. I'm just gonna give up that. You've never really overbet anyone. Most of the time, they're gonna fold until they're getting suspicious, and you want to get a good feeling on when you think people are actually getting suspicious. I'm gonna have to pause the video just a second because I am running out of space on my uh, hard drive. I think I'll be back in a second. Sorry. Alright, I'm back. And I think nothing interesting actually happened, which is good news for you guys. I've freed some space on my hard drive and I should be fine for the rest of that video. Where was I? I was talking about overbet, and I think I pretty much had ended my point on those overbets. Yep. But bottom line of this whole video, I think, is that you want to adapt your bet sizing to who you are playing against, which is true with every single play you are making in poker, and I think I've said that a lot in my videos, but I know this is something that so many players struggle with. They just try to play according to the good old system thing that I'm always talking about, but they make the mistake of never adjusting to the players, and that's the difference between mediocre and good and great players, is that the better you adjust to the other players, uh, the better you get. And a very good way to adjusting to a player is bet sizing. And I think something that I had in mind, I played quite a lot of tournaments recently because of the WSOP and stuff. And I think as much as tournament regulars can be bad when they have deep stacks, which is like common knowledge in poker that they tend to suck post flop, which I stand by my words. There are exceptions, but I think, I mean, by the nature of their game, they don't have as much experience. I think this is something that a lot of tournament players do better than cash game players, is that they adapt better to the other players, even if they have a lot of leaks in their games. And they induce a lot of stuff with their bet sizing, and they are able to manipulate their bet sizings very often compared to the stacks they have and the pot and everything to manipulate their opponents into making a lot of mistakes, basically. Uh, and that's something you do want to learn as much as possible. Here, I don't think I think betting big would be a mistake here, because I think if I bet too big, I'm gonna make him fall out of his 9x, which are basically the ends that I want the Euro call from. So I'm gonna get 4. I think it's pretty much a maximum that he's gonna call with the 9x most of the time. Fish in that spot, and he did have pocket kings, which I did not expect to see. Very often, and okay, that's another good idea right off my mind. A lot of players are just making bet sizing according to their hands. And as high as you can go up to 5-10, and this is still true with a lot of players. Uh, I feel like shoving those trees. I'm gonna skip. Could have been fun though. But yeah, yeah, yeah. I'm just gonna fold that. I expect that guy, from what I think, to barrel quite a lot. I'm never winning the pot if he starts barreling. I'm just gonna cut my losses. Uh, but yeah, a lot of players they just make the mistake of adjusting their bet sizing to their own hand. Especially when they are playing against weaker players, they're like, "Oh, I have the nuts. I'm gonna bet super big because I have the nuts. So I want to build a big pot as possible," which is so wrong, which is so much a mistake, especially against weaker players, like I said, because you want to size your bets according to your opponent's hand. You want to, if you're in for value, to bet as much as possible that you're gonna get called for, which is like, I know once again it was very, very like simple example with my Jack 8 right there, but you have to think that way when you are bet sizings. That was not a spot where I was, okay, I have not that good of a hand, so I'm gonna bet like smaller. That's a spot where I think my opponent doesn't have that good of a hand either, and I want him to call with as many weak holdings as possible, basically. And for that, you want to bet smaller. If I had the nuts, if I had quad tens, I would have gone a bit smaller, I think, once again, because I think that's a spot where he has 9x very, very often. If I think he's folding to a pot size bet with 9x, then going for a pot size bet is wrong no matter what's your hand. I hope I'm getting my point across very well, but a lot of players just try to, when they have the nuts, when they have full house or any unbeatable, and basically to squeeze a little like couple of big blinds in there, a couple more big blinds. Like they just bet a bit closer to the pot and expect people not to care about, which is gonna be true with fishes, but which is a mistake against good thinking players, and which is a pretty big tell a left player gives. But coming back to what I was saying, it's useless to big like regarding to your own hand. You want to bet regarding your own hand. You want to bet uh, in link with your opponent's hand to extract the most value you can from your opponent's hands. And that's pretty much my point there. Or to induce or whatever, but your sizing pretty much has to have a purpose. And this is true as close, like the closer to the river you get, the truer that gets basically. So well, that's pretty much it, yeah. This is a pretty close, but I decided to check call the turn because I did not really want to bet because I thought I would be on table 3 I'm talking about, because I thought I would be over representing my hand a bit by betting there. So I thought that betting sucked basically. Here, this is a good example. I think I'm gonna check because I don't ever have two streets of value, I think, from like ace high and stuff like that. I think I'm gonna end up calling. I'm gonna come back on it later. I have a hard time explaining. I'm just, I just, my brain just froze basically. I'm gonna call this one, and I'm gonna, okay, I decided to check apparently. Yeah, he has those type of hands quite a lot there. I'm going for the pot there because I think my opponent might level himself. I'm actually gonna go for an overbet. From what I've seen, I well, I could receive some hero calls from ace high if I go for an overbet here, because he probably doesn't expect me to ever have a full house. I'm gonna go for thin-ish value there. I totally froze, sorry. I was talking too much and then stuff happened and I froze. But yeah, I decided not to bet that turn, like I said, because I think 3 if I bet again, nothing worse is ever calling me. And my only way to make any money in that hand basically is going to catch bluffs or try some thinner value on the river if the turn goes check and then the river breaks basically. Uh, so that was the plan. I decided to call the turn because I do have a gut shot. I do have top pair. There are a lot of draws that I've missed. And on the river, nothing gets there on the river. I think keeps up bluffing because I'm representing stuff like 9, 10 quite a lot. Pair plus like queen, jack 2 and stuff like that. And I thought that he thought that he could make me fold those. But he has too many busted draws, I think. Like queen 9 got there. He could have turned like 2 pairs with like 10-8 suited. But that's pretty small part of a range for a board where king queen missed, ace queen missed, any flush draw missed basically. So I think I'm pretty happy with my river call there, and it ended up being good. And good example there of bet sizing and not betting according to your hand, but according to the action and according to trying to get the most value as possible from your opponent. Uh, Flop pretty standard. I decided to call one. On the turn when he checks, I think he's very weak most of the time. I think he's likely to have nothing at all. He might have an overpair, but even then, I'm not sure on that type of board if he has like eights, which he's gonna have quite some time, if he's calling 2 streets there. So I thought that the value of him making some weird calls on the river, if I check back there, or trying to go for thin value or on the river or stuff like that, is gonna overvalue the times that I basically try to go for 2 streets of value there, because I'm basically never, very rarely bluffing if I bet the turn against a weaker players. From what I've seen, this player looks pretty good and looks like a thinking player, and that's why I took this line, because when I check back there, he's never ever gonna expect me to have a full house basically. Uh, And that's pretty much it. And like he's on the river, he's not gonna expect me to like value bet, I don't know, a pair of sixes or stuff like that. So he might end up calling with like king eye on that river quite often if I check back the turn. So I decided that the value of that was bigger than the times that I might get two streets of value out of betting the turn plus the river. Unfortunately, the river was the five of spades, and when he checks, I decided to go for an overbet because I thought that this is a spot where he might level himself, that I could be trying to represent the flush very, very hard to get as many folds as possible. And he did think about calling for a very long time. So I think I like my play. I don't know what he thought with, so this is going to be tough actually to analyze, but I think I like my line. And I would have risky, like I'm not doing that overbet, I think, uh, if a spades doesn't come, because when I'm overbetting, I'm like, it's so absurd that I basically always have it, and I think he's gonna see the situation just like that. So I would have gone for like a standard bet on that river of like $12 if the space doesn't get there. But when the space does get there, he's gonna think, okay, sometimes he has ace high and he's trying to make me fold my entire range basically, uh, with a big bet there that's trying to represent the flush, because he knows that I don't have a full house and I don't have a flush because he basically never has any of that. So he did think for quite a while, and I don't know, like I said, what he thought of calling about it. But this is a good example where uh, I played according to my read on my opponent, and the thing that I thought was going to give me the most value according to the action that happened and his possible holdings and not my actual holding. I did not go like, okay, I have a full house, I'm gonna bet, and you never ever get called, and you're like, you don't even realize that you've missed value, but that's what actually happens in that type of spot. So I think you get, and I hope you get my point well there. This was a pretty good example of what I was trying to talk about earlier in the video. This is a lot of talking. I'm getting pretty exhausted. That's why my brain froze there, I think. But I think even though I did not have that many spots to talk about bit sizing, I think this is a very, very good introduction actually, about what I'm going to be talking about. And I'm going to go into more specific spots, more detailed spots later when I'm going to review uh, this. I'm going to come back on this series uh, with entry players hand. Oh, sorry. Here I think I think I have the best hand most of the time, and I think he might be curious if I bet like seven. I expect this guy to be dumb. I don't know why. I just has a feeling that he is dumb, and I expect him to make some hero calls with like fives, fours, or threes when I bet seven. This is really thin, and yeah, it's actually too thin. I'm not sure I like that. But I would have looked so intelligent if he had turned over like fives. But yeah, forget that bit. I think this was just dumb. But yeah, I'm gonna go into more detailed spots and more specific ends when I'm gonna go into the replayer parts of that series. So I know this was a lot of generalities, but this was a good introduction, I think, to my subject, basically. Another good example, I expect this guy who just flatted the bet to be pretty dumb, and I do want to get his whole stack in if he has pocket tens or pocket jacks. I think this is the best way to approach a hand. And he's never ever folding to the first barrel if he has tens or jacks or like nines even here. I don't want to go small with like 11, like half pot and shove the river, because I think he's going to be folding by the river so often with that kind of line, because I think it scares people more to go like with three quote unquote small barrels. And when I go with a big barrel there, uh, I think he's folding a lot less, and I'm just getting more money in the pot against tens and jacks. Now he check raises me, and that totally sucks. And I don't have I have absolutely zero info on the guy, and he's the same guy as there. I'm very not happy about it, but I'm gonna get it in. But like I said, I'm very not happy about it. He might have kings or aces quite a lot there for check raising me, but I don't think calling. Yeah, he has kings without any info. I might have found a fold there with some more info. And for what it's worth, his check raise is pretty dumb because it's totally useless to check raise there because I'm gonna value bet with my queens no matter what. If I had jacks, I was definitely folding, but the possibility of him having jacks there, I think with the money that was already in the pot was too big, and maybe tens even without any really could have some of those random hands, and that was pretty close. But I did have some kind of feeling that I was fucked there, especially since he is playing a couple of tables already, so he's more likely to be a regular. That was my point. Uh, but yeah, coming back on my flop bet, regardless of what he turned over, basically, my point was that he's never folding. If he like, I don't expect him to know my game that much for him to realize that I'm always for value there. But I think normally people against normal people in standard situation are never folding to like one barrel with, like I said, tens or jacks or nines here. So I want to get as much money in the pot as possible right on the flop because it's going to be easier to get the rest of the stacks in if I bet big on that flop for value. And if I was for a bluff and I think he's going to fold like tens or jacks by the river, if I go for three barrels, then I would have gone for like half pot, half pot, half pot. And when you do that at the beginning and you kind of realize that people might start to realize that kind of thing about your game, that's when you can start playing in their minds. As soon as like he sees you doing that type of stuff for value for a couple of times, then you do it as a bluff, and then you turn over and you go for like three half pot bets for value instead as a bluff, and you're gonna get hero called because he thinks you're full of shit every single time. So that's pretty important. That's a good point to have there, and that's a good like meta game, mind game trick to have in your arsenal. I think my microphone is doing some weird noises. I'm sorry about that. No longer, but some. Anyways, not that important. Um, I'm gonna go for standard. I don't want to go too small against that guy because I think he can read sizings. He's not totally dumb. And I expect him to have like king queen suited, ace queen suited, ace jack suited, quite a lot there that he's just gonna fold on the flop. He doesn't always have like a pair or something like that. And you min raises the flop. I think he expects me to make a lot of plays on that. That's my read of the moment. I might be wrong. That's gonna be my read right now. So I'm just gonna fold. That just sucks. I don't regret any of the plays that I've made in that situation. And I think that's quite a lot of stuff actually for just that video. I don't know for how long it's been running. At least 45-50 minutes, I think. I'm just gonna go on for like 3-4 minutes, try to get one last interesting spot to talk about and call it a video, basically. Hopefully something happens. But I hope you like that one, and I hope you're looking forward for the next installments, next videos of that series. And as I'm gonna go forward in that series, I'm gonna move up in stakes too and tell the difference between like bet sizing and trying to represent stuff against fishes. Bet sizing, like basically the weaker the player, the more often you're bet sizing as a mind game to try to manipulate people based on what you basically think they are holding and what they are. Yeah, fuck me. What they are holding most often, and the higher you get, the more thinking the players get, the more you're gonna bet size to, I think, try to represent stuff and manipulate people because of what they're gonna think you represent. I don't know if that was clear, but I hope I made my point. Here I think this guy is never ever folding a queen. And no matter how many barrels I fire out there. I think actually no. I was like, if I bet the turn and shove the river, he might fold a queen. But maybe that against me. I know he knows who I am because he talked to me in the chat a bit earlier. So I think trying to go for a big bluff there would be a mistake. Plus the fact that he has less middle-ish pocket pairs in his range because I do have 7-8 which is a blocker for both pocket 7 and pocket 8, which would be the type of hand that I would be looking to make him fold under normal circumstances, basically. Uh, those are normal circumstances, but I think you get my point that uh, he has he has a middle pocket pair less often because I have blockers for that. So he's gonna fold to my second and third barrel less often. He has a queen more often, and that's something you do want to think about when you are debating whether to bluff or not bluff and other decisions. Blocker are something important that I'm gonna talk about at some time in my next videos, I think. I think I'm gonna just call it quit actually. I kind of like how this turned out. I hope you liked it. Uh, I am Martin Fournier-Giguère, and this was a video about bet sizings.